Welkom iedereen. Welcome everybody. On this special event on the project DECODE, which is a final event for DECODE. In Amsterdam, we already had a final DECODE event in Turin last week with a very international crowd. And we're looking into the state of the internet, the state of technology today. We will start with a little bit broad vision, but then we will zoom in. What are the results? What are what has been done within this project, and what did it try to achieve? We are very happy to have Evgeny, Morozov, and Francesca, Bria together on this. But I will start with a very happy announcement. Can you show me freedom? There's this very strange moment in time. I feel almost back in 1993, when the first hectic provider started to open up the internet to the general public. And these were hackers actually opening up and democratizing the internet. And then, well, the rest was history. 25 years later, we are in a broken internet, in a brown field, and we don't trust the internet anymore. And what's very interesting is that hectic, and I guess most of you know, became Access for All. Access for All was bought in 1998 by KPN, our national telecom operator. And then in 2013, they said, well, you can keep your own technology, everything, but you are not allowed to do your own woordvoering, your own press. Is it press? PR, thank you. And that was already something like a warning. And then on 10th of January this year, they announced that they wanted to get rid of Access for All, and they want to make everybody then a premium KPN user, which really doesn't really fit with people that are joining Hectic and Access for All in the early beginning. So today we launched the group behind Keep Access for All Alive, our own new provider, Freedom. So I hope you all will join, and I think it's a really big moment in time. And I think what's very interesting is that if you look at the statements of Freedom, it is that we want to get our control back on how we use the internet. And I think in all the aspects, it has been a major step towards saying that we want to have internet, but we don't have the shareholders' value in it. So it's a foundation that will look after the principles of privacy and sovereignty. And so I think this is a very interesting starting point. So this is the good news. But there's also a lot of bad news. There's a lot of things happening around us, and we feel that a lot of what has been done in technologies field, we can't trust it. We feel there's surveillance technology surrounding us. We don't maybe trust our own telephones. We bring our kind of gadgets in our house that are connected and surveilling us. So there's data collected, so there's a lot of happening here. And what I think is very interesting is that DECODE started 3 years ago as a project to regain our control over our data. So what we need to do today is to see what is the status of the internet at the moment. What is the status of how we can control our data? Where are we at the moment? So to give a little bit like an overview, and then we want to move into some of the things that came out of the project. And also the role of cities in this whole perspective. Because Barcelona and Amsterdam have been part of this project, and they both have moved on and made some real progress in how cities can control and give sovereignty back to the citizens, but also to the cities. I want to start with inviting Evgeny, Morozov, and Francesca, Bria to the stage and have a little discussion with them. Oh. You had a very successful 2-day program in Turin. You addressed so many different issues. So how do you look back at this conference? How, do you feel that all the aspects you wanted to discuss really was discussed in a proper way?
Yes, first of all, great to be here. Thanks for the invitation. And yes, it feels we continue to have ending of DECODE final events in many different cities. And probably that's because it's not finished. I guess this is actually for us maybe a beginning to understand how we can move forward and what we're going to do in the future. And I think it's great when a project feels it's not ending, but it has really a trajectory. And I think this is because the consortium, the DECODE consortium, which is 15 European partners, 2 big cities, lots of expertise in terms of privacy, cryptography, human rights and digital rights, but also the ability to scale this project throughout Europe. I guess we feel that there is a lot, many different outcomes, and a lot is happening in this space. So I think in Torino we reached 2 main goals. One is to show that there is a kind of a movement reclaiming back sovereignty. And I'm pretty positive in a sense, because I think this is a moment where finally we're having a conversation about the big tech giants and how the digital economy is not sustainable, how, they're not, technology and the current development are not benefiting people, and in particular not European citizens, not even our industry. And we do not see that this can be the technology that enable us to face our big challenges, in particular climate change and the ecological transition. So we are not building a technology that is going to serve society and people. And I think we are all at the same page at the moment, which means we can shift to the agenda of giving power back to the people and understand how a lot of the work that until now has been done by hackers, social movement activists, social entrepreneurs, free software developers, activists for the commons, can now become a mainstream agenda, at least here in Europe. So scaling that up and making sure that we have enough investment and enough manpower to set a direction for this technological future that's sustainable and democratic. I think that in Torino we had a little bit of the feeling that there is, a broad scope for this agenda and that we have some strength. I think starting from the ground up, starting from cities and starting from citizens where the action really is. And I think the second big achievement for me is that we managed to position the DECODE project, which is about sovereign technology, into a much broader framework. It's not really only building technological tools. It is not building technology as a service only. It is looking, I think our challenge is to look at the broader economic problems with this model, the surveillance capitalism and digital capitalism in general. We need to look at the geopolitical imperatives, so why Europe is not doing enough to counter the surveillance capitalism in Silicon Valley and the authoritarian model that China is proposing to us. And then we also started to look at better finance, what is happening with digital money, and if this is threatening the monetary sovereignty. And then look broadly at what kind of economic, political, and social model we want to achieve with this technological change. So for this reason in Torino, if you look at the program, it was really, we called economists, social activists, people that deal with finance, people that are campaigning in progressive political parties. So we had like really broad agenda. So it is important to contextualize these topics in a broader political and geopolitical context.
Evgeny, do you feel that Europe has its strength? Do we have an answer to the whole Silicon Valley proposal? You have been one of the first real criticasters of this of the Silicon Valley morality and approach. Do you think Europe has a real answer now?
No. Next. Okay, so my involvement in DECODE is far less than that of Francesca, who actually came up with it and coordinated the project. I just helped to curate a series of events there and served also on the advisory board of it. I think the way I interpret the experience of projects like DECODE is almost like preparing the ground for what's going to come next after the big crash. So this is the only piece of good news I'm going to deliver tonight, that this whole edifice of the digital economy as it exists today is going to collapse. And it's not going to be pretty, which is where the good news ends. I think in 2019, most people have realized two things about the way things are with regards to the digital. A, that the so-called new economy is not actually new. It has all the defects of the old capitalist system. It's essentially free riding on free contributions of others without properly compensating them. It hides its costs somewhere else, and those costs become visible to all of us much later. And it essentially generates quite a lot of externalities which become obvious only a few years or decades into the game. And on top of it, it's actually not making a lot of money. And it's kept alive almost artificially by continued injections of capital from big funders like SoftBank and Saudi Arabia. So if you look at the kind of creme de la creme of this model, the likes of SoftBank, the likes of WeWork and Uber, you can clearly see that it's essentially fraud packaged as a service. This is what they do. I know it should not be called anything else, and the fact that they kind of have almost evaporated when it comes to their IPOs tells you everything that you need to know about this sector. But in addition to this being just kind of a crash in the making, the problem that we face is that we don't actually have anything quick, robust, and pragmatic to fill in this vacuum, because this vacuum will eventually emerge, and our future will be as good as the quality of our ideas and our prototypes that we have right now in 2019. So in that sense, I think DECODE has tried to articulate and show in practice that the different arrangement of public policy, digital infrastructures, and citizen participation is possible. We've seen that it works at the municipal level. We have seen that it doesn't cost all that much. It probably costs less than WeWork was paying to serve coffee on the private jet to its CEO. If we have enough money and enough political power to scale this project up and to create more projects like this one, also inside the European Commission, which is an occasional ally to this progressive project, but not a permanent ally, because there are all sorts of competing projects vying for attention and for money. I think something robust can be achieved, and at least an agenda of how we can rebuild this economy after the crash can be articulated. So in that sense, I think it's been a success. In order for it to truly scale up, we have to start saying truth to the people that we meet, and we have to start saying the truth at conferences. We have to start saying the truth to policymakers and to European Commission and to everybody else we meet, because the sooner we start telling each other this set of lies, that we have entered a new world where things are free and everything is priceless and there is no damage to the environment, there is no traffic, there are no other externalities, and value is distributed equally among all of us because everybody gets access to these free services, unless we actually show that much of this is just fraud and propaganda, we will continue sleepwalking into disaster. So, the sooner we kind of open up our eyes, the better. And this is where push towards a different European policy would come in handy. And in that sense, all that Europe has managed to do so far is to at least open the conversation about splitting up and breaking up big tech, which I think is a big condition, and it has to happen. But, as they say, it's a necessary but not sufficient condition. And we do not want to break up Facebook only to have 20 little Facebooks occupy the vacuum left in its place. And this is where the work of civil society, municipalities, and policymakers is of fundamental importance to articulating a very different model of what could fill in that space. And I think DECODE has made at least an initial start in articulating what that alternative might be.
Because Francesca, you're the former Chief Technology Officer of Barcelona. Which was maybe one of the best positions to work on DECODE. And what do you think? Do you believe that the cities are the ones that can make this happen? Are they, strong enough to make the difference?
Well, I think cities can do a lot. much more than what we usually think. So I think for two main reasons. The first reason is that that's where citizens are, and also that's where citizens are demanding a different relationship with government because of the lack of trust, in political institutions that there is today, widespread, but also the lack of trust in corporate solutions. So at the city level, that's where you're running basic services, transportation, you're running healthcare, you are rethinking the urban space and creating more public space. There is the question of climate change, which is where cities are very active. So at the city level, you can transform a lot of things. And data and technologies are part of this transformative project. So what we have done, for instance, through the DECODE project has been a series of steps where, first of all, we change the perception of citizens about what is wrong with the current arrangements, why a lot of the current contracts and what we do in government may violate their rights, and the rights over technology, over a democratic control of infrastructures. So, for instance, one of the main actions that we've been doing in Barcelona, which is related to DECODE, has been changing the contracts, the clauses in public procurement contracts. That is not a topic that many citizens, care about very much. But we integrated data sovereignty clauses in big government contracts so that whoever wins the public bids of the city of Barcelona now has to give back the data in machine-readable format to the city hall. And then we declare that data a public infrastructure and the data commons, which belong to the citizens. And this is a very powerful move because if on top of that you also claim that encryption is a human right and ethics and security by design is the norm on how you have to run services at the city level, then you start building a different policy, and also you start enabling a lot of new services to come out of a very different infrastructure which is owned and controlled by citizens. So I think this is a big part of what you need to do and what cities can do. On top of that, of course, we change a lot of the rationale on how you run government big infrastructures. So the DECODE project is, of course, decentralizing the data. So it's about decentralized privacy-enhancing infrastructure, which we have enforced through cryptography. So the main outcome of DECODE is really to make more simple these cryptographic tools that enable people to decide what data they want to keep private, what data they want to share, with whom they are sharing this data, and what are the terms for sharing this data. So usually these are the terms and conditions that are set by the big players, maybe Facebook or Google, that we never read and we accept, that contain a lot of the rights, which are our rights over the data and the information we constantly produce. So in that sense, when you enforce privacy, you also enforce economic justice, because you're saying this data is a common resource, is a shared asset that's very critical to the way we're shaping urban infrastructures, and this control has to be taken back to the citizens that pay taxes. So, of course, I mean, this is countering what cities are doing all the time today, which is signing big agreements maybe with Google or with, actually what is happening a lot these days is that telcos are signing agreements with Google, and then through that, the city, end up putting their data in the Google cloud and end up, following the model of basically surveillance as a business model of how you run government services. So obviously this is not very easy to do, so you need to basically have politicians that understand this is very important also for a lot of things that citizens care about. So for me, this is where the big change has to happen. Technology policy is not about technology. It is about the public services that you are delivering to citizens. So the way you run mobility, education, your climate change policy, your participatory democracy, right to housing, all of these will be affected by the platforms. Yes? And so when you change these rules and clauses about data sovereignty, information control, autonomy, information self-determination, you actually enabling a set of different policies about education, transportation, healthcare, and so on. So I think that's where the link needs to be made, because there are a lot of people which are aware about those issues, but they wouldn't be necessarily capable of discussing data and technology. Yeah. So, I mean, so cities can do a lot. I think at the same time, I agree with Evgeny that this is now a moment to say, okay, cities can come together, they can change procurement rules. Together with the city of Amsterdam, we launched the Cities Coalition for Digital Rights, where we put, we have all these principles about fundamental rights of citizens, which are backed by the UN, and where 60 cities are part of this coalition at the moment. So you start to have a critical mass of cities which are saying, okay, this is how we're going to do technology policy, starting from citizens' fundamental rights, and then we're going to articulate our policy. But at the same time, I think you need to scale this up. So you need the power of governments, and you need the European, level there. So you need more investment.
That has been quite special. That this project was supported and financed by the European Commission. I think, Evgeny, you just said that there's a lot of different powers within the European Commission, so many of the projects don't take the principles of DECODE into account, but it also made it possible. There's also the Next Generation Internet program, which is quite substantial in bringing this kind of technologies, decentralized technologies, into a new program which is now running at the moment. And I think DEIN is also, they were part of the coalition, and they are part of the Ledger program, so there will be some follow-ups here. But what I would like to, because you just said you had some good news, but that was the only good news, that we have sort of like this potential, something is happening, there's a momentum, and cities are joining. But I like your worst case scenario as well, the crash. Can you explain a bit? How are we going to experience the crash? Because we always need both. We need the possibilities, we also need like the hard, a painful defeat maybe of the bigger. Or is it this one? Will the crash not be that there will be an end to the powers of the big platforms, or will it be something totally different? The crash.
Well, sure. We're not talking about a stock market crash, so let's just be clear about that. I mean, we will of course see more and more investors waking up to the fact that they've been told a lot of fairy tales. And the problem is that many of those investors will increasingly be not private equity firms and hedge funds, but they will be pension funds and sovereign wealth funds that, for the lack of other opportunities, decided to park their money with the likes of Uber or WeWork. But my fear is more of the realization that all of us are going to have, that this vision of a frictionless, free, completely kind of smooth economy and society, where we kind of hide the actual costs of its operation somewhere in the back, and we just present the front end, which shines and is glossy and it's very nice. The costs will soon make themselves known. And we are not just talking about environmental costs, even though those are probably the most obvious, costs related to data centers, costs related to cryptocurrency mining, but also actual costs for democracy in the public sphere. So to some extent, the discussions that I think we've been having for the last 3 years or 4 years since Trump was elected, they should have been framed that way, that, essentially there is a huge pollution of some kind of the public sphere happening, and it's happening because there is this evil activity called advertising at the heart of what these firms do. And it's a very different kind of advertising from the advertising that paid for television or newspapers. It's much more personalized, it's much more toxic, and its ability to destroy some of the basic fundamental premises on which civil discourse works in a democratic society is immense. We have, of course, neglected those effects, and we have no way to talk about them because the conversation itself has been so well framed by these companies and their allies, their conferences, their think tanks, the intellectuals, that the only thing we focus on is the fact that all of this is free. Advertising is fantastic because it allows everybody to publish the blog post on, a site supported by Google Ads, right? And I think it's time, it's not that it's time for us to have this conversation, it's that the long-term effects of this are beginning to show up already. We look at the rise of the far right, which have been amazingly successful in exploiting these new gaps in the public sphere that this model has made possible. These costs are becoming more and more visible and palpable. And I think that we have no choice but to put this problem front and center and to do it explicitly and to start talking openly about the costs of sticking with this model. So the crash that I'm talking about might not be the crash that will be explicit, visible, and reflected in numbers. It will be above all also a political and intellectual crash. And I'm not naive enough to think that somehow on the ruins of it all, the progressive forces will emerge victorious, and we will build this, utopian city on the hill. No, the forces that might actually emerge on the ruins of this mess might actually be much worse than the current rulers, and we might actually be quite regretful that we pushed these companies over the cliff. That's, of course, an ironic statement, but we have to have an alternative path and course of action, because if we don't, I can assure you that Steve Bannon already has it. And they know exactly what to do, and they know exactly what buttons to push. And I think in the traditional kind of European Commission-like technocratic conception of the problem, it's very hard to think big, and this is where I think the far right has it easier, because they can think big, right? And they can think in in terms in which Roosevelt and people like that used to think, 100 years ago. And unfortunately, we've lost that ability to think big in the camp, at least, that we would associate with progressive and social democratic forces. And we have to go back to the drawing board. And we have to start thinking big about what an alternative digital society would look like. Whether it would rely on markets and the price mechanism to coordinate, whether it would rely on some kind of social infrastructures mediated by technology. Would we be promoting competition and entrepreneurship, or would we be promoting solidarity and cooperation? I mean, those are big questions that we need to resolve before we can articulate what digital policy we want. The problem is that we have not even raised this big question at the political level, and then we started asking what kind of digital policy we want, right? But this is impossible to be answered. So the only thing we can do now is to keep enforcing this neoliberal agenda with more competition, more startups, and a level playing field, as they say, but without any actual political content that will get us further from the brink. And this is what bothers me so much.
I think I agree.
Good.
Are there any questions? There's now some chance to raise some questions. Oh, there are some people. Because at the heart of Europe, there is the same neoliberal market ideology as in the America. So we have this in our own heart in Europe. Yes, your name, please, and your question.
Yes. My name is Robert. And I have a question regarding to DECODE and how the program is aligned to initiatives such as Solid, Erupt, and Elastos, which is a blockchain verification. Is DECODE aligned with those kind of technologies emerging?
Well, I guess in the next phase of this event, we will gonna explain much better like the pilots and what the technology is doing and how it's different from other solutions out there. I mean, we had a lot of contacts with Tim Berners-Lee and this group and Solid and the semantic web technologies. I mean, actually, DECODE comes from a previous project that we've done at the European level that had the W3C, which is the standard body organization that Tim Berners-Lee kind of contributed to create at the very core of it. So we were looking for standards for decentralized social networking, and that's where we created, it was called Decent, and we created the standards for platforms like DECIDIM and DECIDE Madrid, which are today very large participatory democracy platforms. And we kept working with them, so we know what Solid is doing. I think we're using a slightly different approach. I mean, our project is based on distributed ledger technology and new cryptographic protocols, while Ledger works on the semantic web technologies and is betting on that. So it's different approaches, but I think one of the added value of DECODE, and also that was visible in the Turin event, is that we're trying to create a community out there, so that, we have a lot of different solutions. It's not like one big solution that works for everything, but mostly it's interoperable technologies that you can run with different applications. So in that sense, it may be compatible. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh my God, there are many of them. First, back in the room. Could you raise your hand again? Because I'm... Oh, yeah. Your name, please?
Hello, my name is Desiree, and I work as an IT risk manager. So what I do is translate technical risks to an organizational risk. And in terms of DECODE, you try to create critical mass. And I was wondering, how do you manage to translate what you see as a specialist to the perception of everybody? Because society, you have a lot of variety of people. Not everybody understands it or feels comfortable on the matter. So I'm really looking for success factors and looking for be inspired by DECODE to understand, hey, how do we translate what we see, what I see, to the broader audience? Thank you.
I think we will have some examples later on. There's somebody next to you, but maybe you can just tell us in general what you think are the success factors.
No, the success is exactly the example. So when you see what we've done in DECODE in Barcelona and Amsterdam, is about translating those questions around control over data and important questions around cryptography that not many people really understand or care about, or maybe they do care about, but they don't really use it for different reasons, with things that they will do more in a common way in their daily life, like DECODE now integrates with the participatory platform of Barcelona. So this is a platform we use at large scale. It's called DECODE, and citizens have been using it to interact with the city hall in a very kind of day-to-day basis to participate in defining the mobility policy or define a lot of the different problems that they want to get solved in the city. So this is like we have 400,000 citizens, now 60,000 citizens use it. So it's commonly used. So we use that as a channel to communicate with citizens also about the governance over data. And then explain, if you can control your data, then you can decide what data you want to share. You can decide, these are the risks if you don't do that. These are the implications. And also, this is how we can reshape the a lot of the services that we are in the city. So we tried all the time to bring it back to things that citizens already care about and not to keep it only a conversation about technology. I think, you need maybe the scale of a city, you need politicians to maybe buy into this and help to push these concepts and make it very clear for citizens what are the benefits of these kind of technologies. So maybe we need to work better on this kind of communication.
Yeah, well, we will show some of the real results of it, and those are they're very practical as well. Yeah. Can I, because we want to go to show you some of that work, as a final question to both of you. So we describe where we are. It's like an overview. There might be a crash, but there are some new alliances. There's some new awareness, even political awareness at the moment. So what is the next step? A simple question.
Or maybe something very practical for me. There are two things that are very practical about DECODE. So one thing is scale platforms like DECODE in Barcelona. So platforms that enable civic participation and political participation based on real rights of citizens, on democratic rules, on the rule of law, on citizens controlling their data. Moving away from platforms that manipulate personal information and data for commercial use or because they want to win elections or just manipulate people's opinion. This is very dangerous for democracy. Europe has alternative platforms for civic participation, so we don't have an excuse to keep organizing elections and participation on platforms like Facebook. We have to move away from that and scale participatory democracy platforms like DECODE in Barcelona, owned and controlled by citizens themselves, with no surveillance and privacy autonomy as a business model. We have that. So we need to scale this. So this is one practical thing. And the other thing, I think, would be to create data trusts all around Europe. So to show that the DECODE model is not just a prototype of the DECODE project, and then maybe, we don't know what's going to happen, I think we can prototype these new institutions around data, which at the end, which implies a governance model of data as a public infrastructure, data as a commons, put very strong rules about the big giants. For instance, if they want to access this data, they can only do that on specific conditions. We're going to make this data free for startups, innovators, citizens, data journalists, and for communities, but with strong privacy and security protection. But we're going to charge big companies, and we're going to make it very hard to violate our privacy, and we're going to regain some democratic control. So this model can become a European infrastructure which can be decentralized and privacy enhancing, and this should be built by us. I mean, by the technology innovators in Europe that have to build this new infrastructure. And my bet is that this is not just a technology project. This new infrastructure is going to enable new forms of institutions in healthcare, in climate change activism, in mobility, in participatory democracy. So we're going to start building new prototypes of this kind of democratic society we want. But this has to be very practical. And in order to do that, we have to push for more investment into this kind of citizen-controlled technologies in Europe. So this is an agenda that really should come after DECODE, that it should be part of the next generation internet, but it should be bigger. I mean, it should be understood by policymakers. Yeah. So these are two things that they're coming out of DECODE, and I think we should try to achieve them. And maybe, you know, in Holland, you will start saying, okay, what works for us is a data trust. Maybe it should be controlled at the city level. So maybe the city of Amsterdam now could start experimenting with this data trust or data cooperatives model. And then you can federate it. And then maybe, you know, at government level, some can be done. And then, you know, we should do it at European level. So this is kind of practical, but I think it's very urgent.
There are some data commons projects on its way in Amsterdam. Yeah, so there will be some of those prototypes. Yeah. Great. Evgeny, what's next? What are the next steps?
Sure. So I think one of the intellectual pillars of the DECODE project has been this annual conference that me and Francesca curated, where the unofficial objective was try to drive out the bullshit that currently occupies most of the discussions about digital technology. Because, you know, at this point, the conversation about this resembles almost alchemy. You know, you get a bunch of people who then start repeating some kind of mantra that they've heard at the previous conference about how technology is always ahead and laws always behind, how, you know, you really need to have more laissez-faire stance in the economy for entrepreneurs to innovate, how you need to channel all your resources into working with cryptocurrencies or blockchains. You know, you've been to all these events, right, where you just basically start with a list of talking points and they recycle the same talking points that you've heard the day before. So I think one of our very concrete steps would be to introduce fines to our speakers so that if they like get this entire bullshit bingo, they'll have to actually fund the next conference that we are going to organize. But I think on a more serious note, we really have to contend with the absence of any serious effort to offer an alternative reading of the digital economy. We don't really have a way to talk about the impact of large institutions like SoftBank or sovereign wealth that enters this field from the likes of Saudi Arabia, because it's very hard to pigeonhole into this naive framework of government bureaucrats being slow to do things. You know, it tells you absolutely nothing about why the Saudi bureaucrats actually give their money to Japanese ones to then pour into European startups, right? So our intellectual frameworks are deficient and out of date. And I think we really need to start by realizing that problem. And we have kind of grappled with it at the level of DECODE, but I think the task and the onus is on all of you to go to your public institutions, festivals, book festivals, what have you, NGOs and think tanks, and really make sure that the digital becomes part of a serious intellectual agenda, where we can talk about the history of how we got here, we can talk about the geopolitics of what it means now to resist Silicon Valley, what it means to resist Chinese big tech, which is an entity which is also almost ignored in most of the European conferences. We need to have those conversations if we really hope to have a class of young people who will understand why data cooperatives that Francesca has mentioned are actually necessary. Otherwise, we end up with people who understand that there is something good and intuitively well-intentioned behind this agenda, but they do not understand how it fits into this broader set of questions related to climate change, to unemployment, to basic income, to automation that actually occupy them. So somebody will need to do that intellectual bridge building, and I hope you will encourage all of our existing intermediary institutions and civil society to take on that task.
Well, another thing very practical that you can do is when you have any politicians in any kind of debate, you start asking also about these questions. In the contracts, who is owning the data? I mean, who is owning the technology? I mean, what's the business model? Who is going to decide who owns what in the city and for whom you're building that? I mean, these kind of questions, I think then you know, they deserve answers. And if the contracts are not available, that also needs to put available. I mean, you should demand access to those contracts.
I think we started in Amsterdam with the last elections to ask questions about technology and technology policies, and for the first time they didn't know how to answer it. They didn't even know how to debate it. But I think they learned fast, so it became more a political item. They have to take a stand. They have to explain it, and there's work done, which gives a little bit sort of like a little glimpse of the future. But still is a little glimpse. It's only a starting point. Thank you so much for being here. And I know you have to leave soon, before 9, because what's your anniversary? I'm so happy that you were here on your birthday to join us for us. Thank you so much. Yeah, we said we would look into some very practical, very concrete things that came out of DECODE or is associated with DECODE. And I want to start with Ike. Ike is there. Yes, from the CTO office of Amsterdam, part of the DECODE project, and he will show some of the results.
Thanks. This one is working. Hi, Ike Feberen, City of Amsterdam. Impressed by both of the speakers in front of me. I think it has to dazzle in. I think, at least for me, my main question would be what should we address in our city council and what should we work on today, tomorrow? And I would like to give you a small insight of what happened with DECODE in Amsterdam and what's actually changing the view and the purpose of what we're trying to do. Marlene ended with the politicians, they learned quite fast. Well, thanks for that. I think with the start of DECODE, we had an event here with some of the elected politicians asking questions on, well, who owns the data in the city? Should it be policy-wise, some kind of, should we set some money aside to address these topics? Well, we did in the City of Amsterdam, we did create an agenda on the digital city. And why am I going to make this sidestep and not talking directly on DECODE? Because I think the result of DECODE, especially for Amsterdam, is I think two sides. One is a very direct example about how we can change data transactions with Amsterdammers, people living in Amsterdam. The other one is how it changed policy-wise a lot of topics in Amsterdam. One example is, you'll see here, the QR code. One of the QR codes in these slide decks is a rickroll. The other ones are really QR codes. This is the foreword of Vice Mayor Meliani. She is now speaking in 2 weeks in Helsinki during the presidency of the EU in Helsinki on data trust, on data exchanges, to address the importance for cities to, well, everything that just has been said, that it's important and we should address this European-wide. I think this is very unique to have a city taking that role, taking that stand to say, okay, people, you should really act now because it's quite urgent in our city. We do have some issues. We can have slogans like a city about the data should be of the city or citizens, but we need some help there. I think that's a very important thing. So DECODE helped us shape our digital city agenda on topics around data. The other one, which made really clear that the question just asked before, how do you cope with Inrupt or Solid or other examples? We have no clue as a city. The moment DECODE started, I think every other week there was some personal data vault asking the city, can we please connect to your system and put the data in our vault? And I think I'm really glad that I'm always, yes, go along. But this time we said no to all of them. No, well, I think a lot of them don't exist today anymore. So what would have happened with your data? So it's also about how do we cope with these kind of new initiatives. But the main point I want to make is we have we didn't have any people who would be able to understand about what's going on there. Even now, really proud of DECODE, but the most technical, complex systems, it's really hard to understand what's going on there. So it really addressed as a city that we should invest in people who understand tech. The moment people come to us, okay, we've got this great solution for you, I need colleagues who can say, okay, this is bullshit, this is something we can really use, and this is, well, we have to look into that. One of the examples, one of these people we asked to help us, we'll talk later on. We didn't do it only on DECODE, we did it on a lot of technologies we want to use. It's called Beyond the Hype. And every quarter we look into a new technology to, well, at least for us, to distinguish where should we invest, what can we leave behind, and which is another echo for the next event, or which one is something we really should invest in. One of the examples is where we understood that we didn't know everything ourselves, so we asked a lot of people in Amsterdam to co-create with us. How should we cope with technology? An example, AI, I think there are over 400 frameworks thus far who say, okay, this is the way you should be transparent and audit your algorithms. It's really hard to decide which framework will be the best. So in rooms like this, we co-created our tech policy. And I think that's a new phase in where we're going. So we co-create the policy on which tech, how to use what. The other part of what DECODE did for Amsterdam is that it helped change the story. So how do you make it simple, what just has been discussed? How do you help politicians, but policymakers as well, people in Amsterdam understand what is this thing about controlling your own data? What is this well, I've got a passport, how do I own this kind of data? How does it work? So we created a box where you can put your passport in and see, okay, this is how my information will lead into a new project. Mark Fons, my colleague, will later on elaborate on this more. But it's mainly about helping people understand about what's the in control about your own data. What does it mean? Data about the city belongs to the public. Well, if Google drives around with a car scanning the quality of our air in our city, who owns that kind of data? And it's a pretty tough debate. So besides the pilots in Amsterdam, DECODE also pushed us to think, okay, can we look into procurement? Can we look the things we will procure from now on, but also the things we procured for the last 5 years, to look into who owns this kind of information, kind of data sets. So I think that's what we're doing at the moment. We're we're working on the moment we procure new things. An example, garbage trucks driving around the city. How do they drive to the city? What kind of questions do we ask about data? Onto the things we built within DECODE in Amsterdam. 3 examples. The one on the top right, Gebied Online. Who knows the platform? Okay. Who thinks they're an active citizen in Amsterdam? Online? Okay, I should have asked that question before. That's about 0, by the way, for the record. So I'm really curious about the kind of audience we're having here. Gebied Online is active in 17. I'm really curious getting now. Gebied Online is a platform, 17 neighborhoods in Amsterdam. People online talk about serious things, less serious things. In the end, for us, it's an important platform where people meet. It's, I think, one part of the Amsterdam version of DECODE. Who knows DECODE? Okay, it's interesting. I hope you're not all from Amsterdam, because it would be very awkward if you know more about DECODE than the platforms Amsterdam. But anyway, Francesca, you did a quite good job. Anyway, Gebied Online is pretty a decent platform. Stem van West as well, a lot of sites. What's the main thing? We ask you to join a platform like Gebied Online. We ask you to join a lot of these kind of platforms, but we have no clue if these platforms do handle your information in a decent way. We've got no clue. So this was one of the projects. Can we look into these kind of platforms? And Gebied Online stood up and said, okay, let's join this one. So that's one of the pilots in Amsterdam. The other one is the identity verification. Mark will talk later on about it. And the top left one is about the holiday registration system. Probably everyone who rents out their apartment now and then, of course, you will all register through our form at the city. If not, you should. We know by fact that most of you, even you should, you don't. So we've got an issue with that. So we do all kind of other things, but we also know that we ask you to give us more information than we actually need. So one of the experiments within DECODE was, can we ask you to register that you rented out a house through Airbnb or Booking or any other platform, but can we also not know most of the information? Only if you break the rules, we get access to that kind of information. It started out as a pilot, and now it became one of the serious options for the national registration of holiday rental systems. So it went from a pilot to one of the serious technical options next year, when there will be a nationwide registry system. So in the question, what's next? How to go from pilot to one of the regular system. I think that's the main thing when it comes to pilots. The other thing is, what can you do yourself? I really like these long screen captures of websites, because I think it's really impressive. I've got this idea that no one ever reads the articles written down by all the partners in DECODE, because yes, Barcelona and Amsterdam are two of the cities, because, well, people remember cities who join. But I think it's really afterwards, please look into all the publications that have been made by DECODE, because it's also about how should we cope with platform economy partners? How should we regain control on these kind of topics? There's been, I think, hundreds of thousands of words written down, and probably no one will ever read it. And I think you are probably the last chance to make sure that these words were used in a proper way. I think this is what we do. The last one to address, I think also result for DECODE is that now in the city of Amsterdam, we started a new team. It's called Public Tech, and where we think, okay, we should make a serious effort in, well, democratic control over technology. Hire people who understand, is this really a democratic tool or not? Not only trusting counterparts, etc. So I think it's from a very unique thing that a European project changed a theme, a city, this direction. The last, Francesca addressed it already. I'm really proud that, and it's not only DECODE, but I think it's a large part of it, Amsterdam and Barcelona. I think we're really proud of what we've done. But it's not een deuk in een pakje boter. No idea what's the English phrase for it. But probably ain't much influence in this part. Doing this by a few cities. So the coalition with 60 cities is doing a real effort now. They're working groups on how to control data, how to start alternative ways of procurement, etc. So if you are involved in any kind of these topics, and you don't only want to help the city of Amsterdam, but you want to help 60 cities worldwide to, well, go into the next step, this is an invitation. We need help, we need support on all these questions we addressed. I think 60 cities are awaiting, well, for this next big step.
Thank you so much.
One last thing, what we did with the AI strategy, we invited a lot of people to think along with this. Someone introduced herself as an IT strategist, or another name for the function. We need your knowledge as well for a new data strategy. The 21st of November, there's an event where we, policy-wise, if you're not interested, I truly understand. If you are interested, this is where we want to shape our policy. So if you claim to know something about us, about this, please help us shape the way we should create a data strategy.
Yeah, that will be also my question, because I think DECODE also has enabled new alliances within the city. Could you describe how, because I think it's not just a city hall, it's new civil service that are building up more knowledge about public tech, but it's also new configurations in a city.
Yeah, I think when we say city in this context, it's definitely not alone city hall. It's there are a lot of foundations, a lot of initiatives to try to, well, build an ecosystem. It's a terrible word, but there's a huge group of people in Amsterdam who are really keen on working these topics. On the other hand, there's also a lack of guidance, because people are also doubling and doing the same things and fighting each other because, well, my idea of open source is better than your idea of open source. So it also needs some guidance, and that's a tough debate.
You will guide it.
Well, that's I think the point we made. We're not capable enough to do so. So we ask you for help a bit.
We'll together, yeah. We will guide ourselves. Is there any question for Ike at the moment? Anybody who wants to raise a question? You have been very clear. This was all clear. Thank you so much, Ike. Now I want you to introduce you to Ricard Espel from Dimmons. He's a senior researcher there, and you were involved in one of the pilots in Barcelona.
This is work? Yeah. Thank you so much to have the possibility to participate here. When I saw the last slide, Cities for Digital Rights, now we are very afraid in Catalonia or in Spain for the way that the state is cutting the digital rights, and this is something that maybe it's needed also to debate about this, because the power of cities sometimes are cutted. Are good for the other type of meta governments. I'm trying. I try to not repeat some ideas because the previous speakers has introduced a bit the pilots in Barcelona also, but I'm going to try to focus in the main parts of the main contributions of these pilots. As Francesca mentioned, digital democracy and data commons is a commons linked to the DECODE platform. Then we will try to discuss about what is the contribution of this pilot in the conceptualization of data commons. The other pilot, it's a citizen science data governance, where the community, in order to take the benefit of the centralization of data, it's very powerful. And finally, the contribution of Barcelona Now, that it's a pilot of empower citizens with visualization. The DDC pilot, that it's called Digital Democracy and Data Commons pilot, has adopted the DECODE platform. DECODE, it's, as Francesca mentioned, a very powerful platform in order to the process of making decisions, to engage people in the co-creation of public policies and these things. But it's not only a question to improve the participatory process of political creation. It's also, this platform is also used for a large platform cooperative. For example, Mobilitat. Mobilitat is an energy large cooperative in Spain, and they adopted this platform, and they use this platform to improve the governance of the cooperative. And the people who is very connected to the tradition of cooperative, this is a main point. How to adopt technology in the core of cooperative principles, that most of them are linked to the democracy, to the way that they take the decisions. Beyond the test of the technology, one of the main goals of this platform is to create community, is to use the community that it's already existing in the CDIM and MetaDecidim and to these large projects, to involve in the way that DECODE is providing this new layer of awareness and to keep the sense of the value of the data. We use the CDIM also to create a participatory process to think about the implementation of the pilot. This is a discussion about the legal forms of data, about the governance, and also about the socio-economic impact of this data. Indeed, we are discussing about the creation of Data Commons Manifesto. That is one of the main results of the project. As you can see, 230 participants in the events, 97 proposals, 86 comments, 8 meetings. It's a very active participation process. one of the questions that somebody mentioned before is how to engage people, general people, in this type of projects. We have created also during the development of this pilot a role play called Data Control Wars. This is the way that the people can think try to think about how these big enterprises that controls our data think and how to think in their strategies. But at the same time, they can take the position of civil society. They can take the position of the researchers. We try to reproduce the vision of quadruple helix or the vision of public policies, in the sense that it's a battle. It's a battle where the different actors can take position. And this is something that helps people to take more conscience about their data and how to think in a different perspective. And it's a way that to show that DECODE technology is really important. The other pilot, it's called Citizen Science Data Governance, that has enabled communities to support IIT data gathering and allow them to control what information is shared and with whom and under which conditions. That is the general framework of the DECODE approach. The pilot have been applied around the project Making Sense, that it's an already community that use open hardware kits, that it's a smart citizen community. This is a very small kit, technology kit, as a hardware kit that allows people to measure levels of noise, pollution, temperature, light, and the pilot has been developing for 3 months, and 24 sensors collecting data, a lot of data, and 1.7 million readings about these 44 data sensors, and 2 data policies has been developing in order to engage people about the use of this data, to think about who is the owner of this data, which are the people who are using this data, and how engage people with the value of this data. Finally, Barcelona Now, that it's a platform that integrates the whole power of data gathered from the Barcelona pilots, but also with other data sets that already exist in the Barcelona City Council. The thing of, or the goal of this project is to engage people about the value of data through the visualization. 21 data sets are a result of this project with 7 dashboards and 3 million data points of covering data. When we think about what is the main value, I think, as a global overview of the pilots in Barcelona, we think that we should think about how Barcelona pilots can build a big community around the 3 pilots. Barcelona Data Commons is part of the result of this network. As you can see, this is one of the partners around this Barcelona Data Commons network. Some of them are really connected to the public policies, obviously Barcelona City Council, but also research projects, WOC, EuroCAD, and some of and CNRS, the other group that has participated in this process. There are also civil society organizations, FemProComuns, for example, and then there are a lot of business that are really connected to this idea of data commons. I think this is really a key point. It's not only a question of creating a technology, it's how to engage community in this co-creation of value and to have a different perspective of the data value. Also, the socioeconomic value of this. And this is, I think, it's a key point in order to think the future developments of DECODE and also the model of the sustainability of the project. Only to try to advance a little bit more the discussion in the final panel, from Demons we have created this framework in order to analyze holistic what means the creation of technology or the digital platforms, taking into consideration the governance of the technology, the economic model, the technology and data policies, and final, what is the social and responsibility impact of this type of platforms. Just only to try to advance a little bit more about
you only have 10 seconds left. You have 10 seconds left for this whole slide.
Okay. No.
Oh, sorry, I don't want to discourage you. No. But maybe you show it, and then people can read it, and then we can have some questions still. Yeah, I think. Thank you so much. This is a whole program. This is only a starting point for a lot of new things. What is in Barcelona? Because you just described that there was a very good political environment. Is this changing, and how are we depending on this changing political agendas?
Yes, this is one of the key points, I think. The project has been supported of the City Council, not only to the development of DECODE, also to the different political strategies that are linked to the DECODE project. For example, the City Council provide a match funding campaign that it's using a platform, a crowdfunding platform, but in the founding of the projects, the project that gets €1 from the community gets another extra euro from the City Council. Why this is important for DECODE? Because it's the way that some projects can think in the platforms in order to improve the democracy of their organizations, and how to adopt this technology if you don't have the support of the City Council. The City Council provides training programs to use better the technology. The City Council provides funding campaigns in order to promote community engagement and also to get more economical sources. This is an holistic vision about what it means, I think, sustainability and how to engage citizens in this.
Thank you. So, are there any questions at the moment? Everything clear? Wow. Oh, there. Sorry. Your name, please?
Jan en Hoogstad, Public Spaces. I just have to ask, what is a quadruple helix approach?
Maybe it's something that it's not very extended, but it's when
it's
we
also
think,
being used here in the Netherlands.
No, we have a problem. The problem that you want. We can create different perspective about this problem. The idea is not only to think about policymakers should give the answer about this problem, is that public administrations can give some of their visions. Also, research can provide their visions. Also, the civil society should have a role in this. Traditional unions or unions in general, associations, or this type of citizens organization, and also the vision of the business models. This helps to share different approaches to the same problem. And when we think about data commons, we should think about what is the role of citizens in data commons, but what will be the role of research in this to promote data commons. This is the way. It's the same problem. It's a different perspective of the same problem, and to put in the mind of a different.
Yeah. I think it's also a reaction on the triple helix, which told us. Yeah. So it started with a triple helix that they told us that cities or governments have to work with companies and universities, but then within the triple helix there is no society involved. So the quadruple helix says we need. Maybe that collaboration, but we definitely need society as part of the development.
Some people speaks about a fifth helix, that it's the media.
You can you can go on and on and on. Yes.
No, it's sitting in different perspective, indeed.
Yeah. But we believe at the heart of any triple, quadruple, whatever, should be activists, artists, and hackers. Aren't we? Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for your presentation. We're going to continue with an example of digital identity. This will be done by Mark Fons, where you were at the back. He's the lead for digital identity at the city of Amsterdam.
So, yeah, thank you. I'm honored to represent a group of people that I work with. I'm presenting their work. Digital identity is a project that came from DECODE. And let me show you how. I travel through the Netherlands and I work with different municipalities. And when I do that, I use this presentation, or part of this presentation, and I meet a lot of great people, really very interested. Some of them are already up to speed. A lot of them don't know what it is, and they think it's very complex. And some of them are very critical, and they say, well, we don't really need that. We already have that. Let the market take care of it. So I then confront them with a couple of examples. I just grabbed them from, the daily events, the daily newspapers, stuff that happens. And this is something that happened just 2 weeks ago. It's an artist that, we're 40 artists. And Julia Janssen has made a fantastic performance. She clicked on Got It here. You see these privacy settings. And it was a Daily Mail a cookie. And she agreed, and she found out later, on 835 privacy policies just by clicking on this one, which took her 0.0146 seconds. And she spent a long time to gather all these privacy policies, put them in a book, and now people are reading that book as a performance. And it takes 450 hours to read this book, and you can imagine the kind of language is very poetic. It's beautiful poetry from the heart of our technology people, and of course it's a swindle. Now another thing that happened 2 weeks ago was John Rogan had Edward Snowden as a guest. It's a 2.5-hour interview, and I tell people, go see it. It's on YouTube. You can watch it. And the day after, 10 million, more than 10 million people watched it. And if you haven't seen it, it opens your eyes. So this is what I do. I want to open people's eyes for the problem. Now, the next thing, and that's the last, but I could go on. It's a really hot topic. Shoshana Zuboff has her book out, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. And if it's free, you are the product. People are slowly waking up for this, and more people understand this. And also, fortunately, I can tell you, our central government also woke up. And this guy's been working for a couple of years now on a new law. There's a new law for digital government coming. It's in the second chamber in our, in our parliament. This year they're working on it every day because I have an email, list where I'm part of, and it refreshes like literally every other hour. So they're adding stuff to it, and we're watching what they're adding because we need this. We need this to build this new kind of digital identity that comes from. The DECODE project, pretty much. So there's urgency and there's momentum. This is our law holder, Turia Meliani, and she's the owner of the Digital City program. And my project, Digital Identity, is part of that program, and it started off with DECODE. And so we want a creative city, we want a safe city, an inclusive city, an open city. We want privacy by design, we want data minimalization, and we want participation in democracy. And so, Barcelona, you're not alone. So the one thing, though, that we really need to do, we don't want a 20% market share for our digital identity. We want a 100% market share because we need everybody to be safe and everybody to be able to use their own personal data in the modern society, in the modern city. So we have to make this technology human. And this is part of what we do. We do a lot of research. We research our kids, in this case, my kids, and we find out how they operate in this new digital landscape that they're in. We also ask other people for our memes and our habits, you know, because we want to design along the lines of their thinking and their doing and their acting. It should be part of their existence, so it should fit their existence. So we want to see how they move from what we call plastic to digital. And then when I tell them, actually there's one of those plastic digital cards or plastic cards in your food when you eat, you know, regular food, they'll go like, well, let's get rid of the plastic. So that's a nice little thing that's happening. So we started off with DECODE 2018 with Waag, who made a fantastic digital identity lab. Tom de Meijer, who is here, and Job have been working on that. And when I became the project leader, I used that as an anchor, and it was a fantastic product to give direction to this thing. We built a box and we asked people to come in, to put a passport on a near-field chip and read it and put it on their phone, see what happens. And along the way we learned, and along the way also in 2019, we started to see that this is not something we want to do by ourselves as a city. We need other municipalities too. So we have been spending time to connect to all these other cities. And also our central government noticed our project. I kept sending them prototypes, and I kept telling them, listen, we need really easy to use tools if we start this next generation of digital identity. And they listened, and they gave us some more funding for our project so we could scale up. So now we are working with these municipalities, also with some other central government agencies. They're building a new digital identity app that we can use to build other apps, and with some, what is een stichting? Foundations, thank you. And the SEDN, which is the foundation that keeps up the domain name of the Netherlands. And so this new infrastructure we use to design this new identity. Now in the Netherlands, this is a little bit of history. A digital identity was first a paper identity, and it was the Code of Napoleon that made a civil register for the first time in 1810. And now, of course, it's all digital, and we have this central digital identity system. Now, everybody has all these other identities tied into all the different topics and things they do in their life. And you see that all these technology companies have nicely managed to build their businesses along our identity. That is what they use. They use our identity, they use our personal data. So the basic register in the Netherlands is a relatively stable identity that stays the same. You have a unique number in the Netherlands when you are born. All these other parts of your identity sort of move and meander and change. So we need something, you know, that works along these lines for it to be part of daily life, for it to be handy and not to be only usable in one way, in one case. So what we're building now is an application. Our central government is building a new application that establishes people's identity without any doubt and is certified by our central government as real. That you can put on your phone and is yours. Those are your personal data from the register. Now we can add city data to it, and we're building it into a card system, and that card system is an application on your phone, so you have all your personal data on your phone, you bring them with you, and you can do your digital or non-digital transactions with either government or non-government. Well, of course, everybody needs to use it. I love this picture. This is so Amsterdam. This is the two sisters are, the one's name is usability and the other is inclusivity. Not. But inclusivity means everybody needs to use it. So we're not testing this. We do a lot of usability testing. We're not testing it on you and me because we can manage ourselves, but we're testing it on people that are less capable in the digital atmosphere. So what we found out is that you don't explain privacy, you design it. It's called privacy by design, so that's what we're finding out. We set it, and now we're doing it. This is how we do it. We put users at the center, and we use the UX design method. And this is how it works. You have all your data on your phone. Pretty much if you want to show that you're 18, but it can be anything else. Oh, there's some font missing. You can show yes, I am by picking. Oh, that doesn't work here. Anyway, you only need your date of birth and your picture, and then you can translate your date of birth to yes, I am 18, and can show your picture. Oh, that works only on my machine, I guess. Now, just to give you a little glimpse on the design, these are a screenshot. My usability tester and designer are in the back of the room, so this is not the final design. We've been discussing it, but these are the designs we're testing with people to see if we can make a wallet with their personal data that they can use. That is as easy, as using other things on your phone that have cards and wallets in it, or even the cards and wallets in your pocket that you used to have in plastic. This is our timeline. We're very ambitious. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves. By the end of the year, the 2 applications that work in tandem will be done for the minimal viable products will be done. And in the next 2020, we will be testing in all these municipalities with people, see how it works, and then we'll have an event in April. And I hope to see you again and tell you all about it then.
It's interesting to see that you really try, what you just said, that to explain people how to become sovereign and how to control their data. A lot of people feel like this is too complicated.
Totally.
But then you say we have to design it. So, are you feel that you're near a solution that would be easy to use for everybody?
Yeah. We feel like in the next, we're closer and closer. We're closing in, and the way we do it is we now redesign every 2 weeks an iteration of a prototype, and we're narrowing into testing specific things in the user interface. And then whatever comes out of there, we iterate in the next 2 weeks in another city with other people. And as we go along, we give that to the development team who is working on the application. I think it will work, yeah.
You mentioned Irma, I reveal my attributes is a very important aspect of this whole concept.
Yeah.
That you only reveal certain things about yourself, not everything.
Basically all your personal data, like your name or your date of birth, are stored safely and on your telephone, on your mobile phone. You create an encrypted session, and in that session you only give specific parts that are necessary for the service. And so we also are, look, you can do a lot of things with that, but basically you only reveal or you only share, what is needed for you to enter that space. One of the things also we want to do, of course, is that when there's some kind of, over asking, that we can flag that and people can say, hey, they're asking this and this and this. Are they allowed to do that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody has a question there? I see a question. Your name, please.
My name is Douwe. I want to specifically go into the question, the last part. Hello.
This is Tada.city.
Yeah. We know each other.
No, this is Douwe. I work also for Tada. Just to set it clear. Talking about that last thing, the oversharing part. Yeah. When I want to get my booze late at night and I'm really drunk and take all my data, just like the I got it button. Yeah. How are you going to prevent people from always valuing their privacy? And how are you going to prevent that Irma or the city is going to set the lock and centralize that kind of decisions?
It's almost like you're asking me, how do I prevent people from being drunk? But let me answer you this. Okay, you can't prevent people from losing their passport on vacation. They've been drinking. They go back to their tent, they wake up the next day, oh, my passport's gone. You can't prevent a lot of things in society that people do. So I don't think that's our responsibility That's the responsibility of those people. And then they have to go back to the city and the municipality and get a new passport. So this is the same with this new digital identity is no different. So as far as that, nothing is changing. Smart people will take care of it, and careless people will sometimes lose things, and they have to reinstate, what they lost. But it's, that's part of the game, So that's a different topic than digital identity, I think.
Okay. Maybe a short question, because we want to have other two speakers as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Gabi Schliever. So I've been doing research on smart cities in a broader sense, and also the emergence of design and user experience design in the public sphere. And don't you also see it a bit critical that now principles of user experience design, which is kind of a corporate method to have a seamless experience, now becomes introduced into the public, almost as if citizenship becomes reduced to an experience? And so how do you think, what are the implications almost for human psychology to be kind of nudged into certain kind of data sharing practices? And that it all also a little bit becomes also a bit of a destruction of all the other data mining industries that are still continuing to exist by providing a different type of alternative that leaves you the impression to be more empowered as a citizen.
Are you not doing the same as all the others, as the Googles and the Facebooks?
Oh, yes.
Are you? Yeah.
Well, maybe it comes down to this. Who do you trust?
Not everybody trusts the government. I'm sorry.
Yeah? So it's a very difficult problem. It's not something you solve easily.
Maybe let's take that to the last discussion later on, because I think it's a very essential question. Yeah. I would love to introduce you now to. Thank you so much for your presentation. I want to introduce you to Nina Boelsoms. We know her from the action against the SleepNet. I'm still we're so happy that you, together with 5 other students, you took this initiative. But now you joined DEIN, which is a very important partner in DECODE. You will explain a bit what DEIN did at the core of the technology.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. Yeah, so like you said, my name is Nina Boelsoms, and I work at DEIN, sort of at the place where the design and the technological developments meet. And DEIN is a technical partner in the DECODE project, and I'm going to briefly go over the technologies that we have developed for bringing all of these brilliant thoughts into technology. I'm going back, technology. Right, so first off, this is an overview of the pilots and that we have been doing with DECODE, and that all have been using technologies that we have developed, which most importantly are the DECODE OS and Zenroom, which I'm going to explain in more detail later. But first, let's have a look at the pilots that we have been doing. So, discussed before, there was the petition signing part, where of course it's important to understand, like, is this person allowed to vote? Are they 18 plus? Do they live in the right region? Have they not voted before? And this is a very tricky privacy question. And at the same time, you want to be able to have access to the data meanwhile. And for this, we have been developing Zenroom to work on the smart contracts, because this is all running on the blockchain. Oh, by the way, I am going to talk about blockchain. Feel free to throw stuff at me when I'm doing the blockchain bullshit bingo things. Another example is the sensors in Barcelona that we also talked about, where there is the dashboard where you can see the visualizations of the sensor data that is being created, which is also running on blockchain technology and then being encrypted via Zenroom and then decrypted in the dashboard itself. So we sort of developed the encryption VM for this. And maybe also another one nice to highlight was the 18 plus attribute-based credentials pilot, for which we also use Zenroom in order to encrypt these credentials and to be able to access them when suitable. So that was the trailer for the technologies. now comes the real stuff. So first of all, DECODE OS. DECODE OS is, like the name says, an operating system developed for DECODE. What it does, it runs systems as microservices in a hidden cloud. And what does this mean? So you can have a device, a container. We've been working together with Arduino to test all kinds of different hardware. And you install this distribution, and as soon as you start it, it fires up Tor. And all of the messaging goes through the Tor network. Who hasn't heard of the Tor network, by the way? Okay, I'll quickly explain the Tor network. It's like an onion with internet encryption. It facilitates being able to use the internet in a private and encrypted manner because you hop around through different nodes all the time with different layers of encryption to ensure that you cannot be followed around the internet. Right?
Well, good enough.
Okay, fair enough. That's the idea. This operating system then ensures that all the messaging goes through this Tor network. And then it enables you to build all kinds of different applications on this operating system and to run this on whatever hardware you choose. So this sort of ties in with DECODE's ideas of anti-censorship, of privacy by design. Yeah, just a thing we made. And secondly, there is ZenBridge and also ZenCode and ZenRoom, which I will talk about. This is more focused on the blockchain aspect of DECODE. So what it does, well, initially we made it for the petition signing, but of course it can be used for way more things, because it is a blockchain agnostic middleware which facilitates building applications for whatever blockchain you like, because they come and go like people. And it facilitates the development of blockchain applications, like I said, as a REST API. Aside from that, it also checks for the quality of data as a feature to ensure that somebody isn't throwing in bullshit data on your blockchain application. Most importantly, like I said, it is blockchain agnostic, so it can run on many other things. And what it does, it mainly sort of, enables the encryption that we need on blockchain applications, which we facilitate through ZenRoom. What is ZenRoom? ZenRoom is a virtual machine, a very secure virtual machine, and a very tiny one as well, which you can use for encryption of your blockchain applications. I can go into the details mainly of the encryption and such, but I think what the most interesting aspect of this is, especially in relation to the DECODE project, is that it facilitates interdisciplinary code review through ZenCode, which is the domain-specific language that was developed for ZenRoom, which is the virtual machine. So, what is ZenCode? ZenCode is a programming language, obviously, which is human readable. So I'll grab the example. I hope that you can read it. As you can see, the way that you write code for in ZenCode goes like this. The scenario is request, make my declaration and request certificate, given that I'm to introduce myself as Alice, blah, 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 blah. Could be read as a very dry script for a theater performance, but it's actually the code that is then translated to Lua, which is a different programming language, which is then executed in the ZenRoom VM. And why this is an important feature of ZenRoom or ZenCode is that it allows for lawyers or activists or whoever would like to know what exactly the smart contract is that is executed on the blockchain, to be actually able to read and audit that and to understand what is going on. Because we believe that in order to take the power out of the technocratic institutions that now rule our our technologies, it is very important to be able to understand exactly what is going on, and then to be able to act on that in accordance. So it's also sort of in contrast to 300 pages of I agree paper, you can actually read what is happening there in human readable language. It is also based on research on language security. But I would ask you to refer to the research that we did on that, because I cannot confidently give you detailed information on that. But I guess the core principle here is that we try to create security and citizens' empowerment through the awareness and understanding of the code that is being executed. So these were some brief descriptions of the technologies that we developed in DECODE, which I hope channel the values and the ideas that have been created in this project, and the pilots, of course, as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for explaining very complex things in a very, very accessible way. And we think it makes sense to also discuss technology in a way that you have done, and not just move away from it, because this has to be some of a sort of literacy in technology that we have to learn. And I think the whole step to make it readable is quite an interesting step, to make it readable. Yeah. You will be part of the panel later on.
Yes.
So shall we first move on and then do some questions? Then you will be on the panel later on. Is that okay?
Great, yeah.
Then we have another, then we go, thank you so much for your presentation. And for the great work that Dine had put into the DECODE project and all the building blocks that you have been building. I want to invite Pauline Dreschner and... okay. Yeah, no, Jan-Hein Hoogstad, about, you will present public spaces to us.
Thank you. Well, hello everybody. I think we are all here to somehow celebrate the results of DECODE. Well, I'm here to somehow introduce a new project, which started last year, and it's called Public Spaces. Public Spaces is an initiative organized by, I think we are now with more than 19, 20 organizations that were somehow worried about the state of the internet. I mean, we've heard it before today here, and somehow I feel like I'm preaching for my own choir here, but we'll do it anyhow. The internet had a lot of promises for all of us, like unlimited access to information, giving voice to minorities, co-creation, democratization, big expectations. But as we know now, 25 years later, things have changed a little bit. We were somehow all very disappointed because it was not driven by our ideals or ethics, but it turned out to be driven by shareholder values. And those shareholders seem to be our very, very intimate friends. They know who we are, what we think, what we want, what we like, what we should buy, and they try to steer us into certain directions. So, move fast, and we broke society even. There is this Wikipedia page that gives us an example of 99 problems we have online. And those problems are not only problems we have as personal individuals, but these are problems that are also addressing society at large. So it's not just something we can fix because we are smart enough to fix it. It's something that you see everywhere, organizations, in governments, etc. So this is something that becomes more and more obvious at a larger level as well. It pops up in the news. We see fake news. We see meddling around with elections, etc. So the privacy violations, fake news. I think we are in a time right now that we all see that it's time to, well, for a change. This is us. This is the public organizations behind public spaces. And we have a very special position in the sense that we are, on the one hand, obliged to reach our audiences because we are being paid for reaching our audiences with our programs. But at the same time, our audiences are somewhere that is not public at all. They are all on private platforms. So this is where they are. We have to go there to be with them. By being there, we are somehow enhancing and enforcing this whole capitalistic American background where all those platforms are operating. So as public spaces, we came up with a manifest. That's one of the things you do, right? If you want to change things, you write a manifest. We came up with 5 ideas where online platforms should, look at. The first one is accountability, user-centric. It should be transparent, open, and sovereign. So we have a strategy, and we use those 3 ways. The first one is we want to try to create awareness on a larger level. I mean, even me, I'm working for the Netherlands Film Festival as a programmer of the interactive program. And my department is really, think this is all very important. And then the people from the marketing department ask me, but what can we do? What shall we do? What is possible? How can we lose our Facebook account without losing the people we want to reach? So this whole awareness, even within the coalition of partners that are already on our side, it's good to keep discussing possibilities. The second one, the trajectory we want to take is implementation of existing open source applications that are already there, but maybe not user-friendly enough, or with just not enough, not enough people know about it, etc. So at the moment, for example, Sound and Vision, together with VPRO, is working on PeerTube. We are working on Mastodon, those kind of things. Once it's being further developed, it could be appropriated more easily by partners of the coalition. And then the third trajectory is a new development. It's called Badges. And Badges is something that my colleague Jan Heijn is, it's basically his project. And he is working on this since a few months now. And we are hoping to finish this development by the end of January. It's the start of a larger initiative. Jan Heijn.
Okay. Thank you. It's very handy that I can see exactly how many seconds I have. So I will do my best. Okay. Pauline already told about the values that underlie public spaces, but I think what is also important is that behind those values, or also as a foundation for these values, there's also a virtue, and that virtue is also, I would say, trust. It's basically to regain or to work through or to reconnect or re-establish trust relations on the internet. Because one of the things that we're often missing when we talk about a lot of the problems that we talked about today is how can we trust each other in the digital space. And normally we talk about it on social media and all these things, which are very important. But I would also like to go to the underlying trust, basically the trust in the software, in the projects, and in the technical infrastructure that DECODE already tried to develop alternatives for. If you ask, and it's more of a side tangent, and I'm going to try to fit it in even with the time. If you ask technologists to solve the issue of trust, normally they come up with security. And I want to state for once and for all that security has nothing to do with trust. Security is necessary on these places where trust isn't there. If we have trust, we don't need security. If we need security, there's probably also something wrong with the trust relations. So next time you pick up your iPhone and you realize that there's military-grade encryption on your phone, maybe not think like, wow, that's great, my privacy is being secured, but think about why do I need military-grade encryption to play Angry Birds? So today we're talking about trust, not about security. I think that's a very important distinction. And where security is about guarantees, trust is about evidence. But I'm going to skip to these parts. This is just the point with digital software nowadays is not that it's, we still think about it as if it's a book written by an author that wrote the first line and the end of the line. But that's not the reality of what software is. Software is way more like this tree. And no matter if it's proprietary or open source, it's a network of dependencies. So if we talk about trust here, it's really difficult to say like, okay, who do I trust? Because we can focus on the part that's above the tree. Oh yeah, I know Microsoft, I trust them. But how do we know what is happening beyond there? What happens on the branches and the leaves? So I'm going to skip to all of this. And not because it's not important, but because, well, it's not the most important thing. This is just a fraction of the dependencies that an open source knowledge management system lies on. And even if we trust those libraries, which are transient trust relations, then how do we know we can trust them in the future? This is an example of bankruptcy. I can talk more about it later over drinks or whatever. But there's this trust. So the badges are alternative and a project that we say, a first initiative to say, how can we provide evidence to users or to other developers that you can trust a certain library or a certain organization. And what is important about it is, normally when we think about badges, we think of them as an insignia of merit. You go to the Boy or the Girl Scouts and you get your campfire badge or whatever. But the insignia of merit here is actually just a visual representation of a technical test that we run on the background. I'm very grateful to Nina because she already showed the domain-specific language that looks very similar to the one that we use for the badges. This one is called Gherkin. It has been around for 15 years. And it's a way to describe scenarios, just like the ones that you described before, where we write in human-readable language what kind of things we want to test about an organization or a library. And what is important about our approach, 27 seconds. What is important about the approach is that we don't go around and say you have to do this, but we ask the people what they're already doing right. And we try to encode that in the badges. So then it's converted into a document, a technical document, a JSON, very easy JSON document structure for those who are known with the underlying things. But, and that's the last part, if we know which organizations do things right, we can start mapping the internet. And we can start building institutions. We talked about foundations and building blocks before. We can start building foundations on top of it. So if we can provide badges to websites, organizations, protocols, whatever, and we have the mapping, we can also say, hey, this is a public service that needs extra money. We can start acquiring funds for it, or we can start thinking about how we can make partners or force governments, or stimulate governments to adopt a certain alternative. Okay, I can talk for hours more about this. You probably know that, you probably already guessed that, but I think I can wrap it up here. Thank you very much.
Let me help you to ask you one question. Sorry, yeah. Just to clarify what you were just discussing, because we now see node tracking. So a badge, when you have a badge on your homepage, like the VPRO, for example, and it says node tracking, then you did a check, a technical check that there is actually no tracking installed.
What is important, that's why am I still on? Yeah. That's why I started about the trust and not the guarantees, because we're talking here about tests that can test. Important to realize is we are not only a technical solution. We're a coalition. We're people that have a trust relation, and we actually sign manifestos and all these things to establish a certain kind of trust relation. Given that, there are things that you can test to see if people, for instance, don't track while you're on the website. For instance, the example that was once phrased by Tom, which I think is still holds, you can track if a website has any kind of communication with other servers besides the one that it's hosted on. So the origin policy. You can test that. Do you know then at that stage that the website or the server doesn't provide your information to elsewhere? No. But at least you know that they do something and they don't do Google Analytics, for instance. So it's not about guarantees. It's about what I said in the beginning. It's about gathering evidence, collecting evidence, displaying that evidence that facilitates a dialogue. And that's the most important thing between organizations, among each other, institutions among each other, but also with users and citizens. What are the values that we want to guarantee, and how do we actively implement them? Rather than checking them and controlling them and trying to police them. That's not the
So
issue.
organizations that are having a badge on their front page, they tell us you can trust us, but we'll have to. Of course, we're not going to police them. Anyway, I think it's going too far now to go too deep into it.
Yep.
I'm realizing that. We can do some talks later on.
Yep.
Thank you so much for the public badges story. We have another few minutes. I would love to see some of the people back on stage. Oh yeah, please take this away. Pauline, you were going to join us. Nina, you were going to join us. And Ricard and Ike. I'm not sure if Ike is still around. Yeah, there you are. Very good. Yeah. So what I would love to, and Sander from Waag, who is my colleague at Future Internet Lab and involved in many of the projects that we discussed today. Let me ask you first, I use this one. We have seen a lot of examples and a lot of big stories. So we come from like, we will have a crash, big tech will crash, we can't trust, we need politicians in place, and then we saw a lot of very technical but also very concrete examples. If you look at a public spaces initiative at the moment, and you see that these organizations are committing to something as a public space, do you believe there is a momentum? Is this something? Is there a change in behavior? Is there something like a push that moves away from the surveillance models into more like a commons-based or public environment?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that the momentum where we are now is that everybody starts to notice that something has to happen. But it's not clear where we need to go. And this is something we encounter also as public spaces, that it's a kind of, especially people who are kind of skeptic, they ask us, what exactly is it you're going to do? And we are just making answers like we move around the answer, like we try this, we could do this, and we could do that. But for some people it's not concrete enough. Sometimes more about the intention and still the ethics than the concrete technical implementations where Jan Heijn was talking about. But we talk quite a lot with governments as well, and we also have a European coalition where we have quite a lot of discussion with academia, etc. And it's really like the momentum is there because everybody starts to realize if we don't do anything now, then it is too late.
Just this coalition of cities shows us that this momentum is there. Do you think it's strong enough at the moment, or what do we need to make it stronger?
Well, actually, I'm more impressed with the public space initiative. I mean, you are very modest with saying, well, we've got 19, 20 organizations, but I think the BBC and the VPRO and a lot of organizations behind it.
Yeah, the European coalition I left out of the story because I only had 5 minutes. But it's larger.
But I think, and that's also if it's for the cities coalition or the government perspective. But the main issue, Mark Fons really explained briefly. We can do a lot of things, making things understandable. We can, I think, cut out a lot of boundaries for people to join on technologies which are responsible, etc. But in the end, it only works when people are actually using it. And I think you represent, a millions audience, with, of course, the irony about walls around VPO. But the only thing, and that's what I really hope, that you would also enforce it. Because that was the debate you ended, and that's what I really would hope that you would say, yes, we're going to enforce it. Because there's so much initiatives of people who say, okay, we've got great impressions, great ideas on principles, etc. But the next step is really hard to tackle. I'm really curious about why, and if it's, yeah.
Well, I think we are, as an organization with all those public broadcasters, film festivals, etc., we are in a really good position to enforce the use of certain new applications. For example, PeerTube seems, innocent enough for everyone to embrace. And then you already
as an alternative to YouTube.
Yeah. So the Sound Vision is already quite far with its development, and it's also a network of servers you need. So I cannot imagine any reasons why festivals like the NFF or the ITVA would not start using this, and then you immediately have a very large group of people who are being drawn towards this.
I think the main thing is, I think I can trust public spaces when there are 19 organizations behind it, which I know, then I have a certain idea of trust. There's this website, ethical.org, if you ever want, in doubt, you want to use some other services than Microsoft, Google, etc. There's a nice list of alternatives. What really helped me as a regular guy who tries to do the good thing, but has no clue where to start, if you put your badge on one of these services, I think, okay, it's got a checkbox by you. So you can expand it quite easily, I think.
And what if there's public funding behind an organization like public administration or healthcare or education or culture, then it implies that you're not using surveillance capitalist software and platforms. I think it would make so much sense that you're not allowed to use that money to maybe Sander, you are also working. You're coming from an Open Knowledge Foundation. Have been part of this sort of movement around open knowledge and open source and open hardware. What would make the next step? What do you think is the next step to make it more sustainable and larger?
Yeah, I think lots of steps, actually, a bit similar to what was said earlier. I think Ike made a good point. There are lists of alternatives. There are ways in which more ethical alternative technologies are being developed. We've seen some within DECODE. Jan Hein showed the badges, which is a way in which we start, as I'm part of the Coalition of Public Spaces as well, we start to identify what it means to build ethical technology. So it's one thing to think, these principles we can agree on. We have the Digital Cities Coalition principles were shown, the public spaces principles, and we have a sense of alternatives which help, which are better than the surveillance capitalist model. So PeerTube is an example of a video platform which is better in a sense than Google, but how do you decide what is better and what's not better, right? And this is one thing that we're trying with the badge, but there's a broader sort of ecosystem of ethical alternatives. Actually, as part of DECODE, there was a boat trip last year where we explored what's called the public stack. So the public stack is a way of exploring alternative technologies on all levels of the stack. So not just software, but also middleware, hardware. As Jan Hein explained, there are these issues on all levels of technology. So I think the next step is exploring and better develop all of these different alternatives, because they are so part of our everyday life and they're part of everything that we do these days. So we need these alternatives on all these different levels. Applying the badge to these alternatives, I think, is a really good idea. So think of ways in which you can say this is a better alternative than that. I think a key point to make is that it's not black and white. It's not that one thing's 100% good and one thing's 100% bad. There are always sort of shades of grey in that sense. And we also need to have a conversation about, okay, what is good about this and what is not so good about this. And not everyone will even sort of make the same balance of what they think is important. So I think exploring that more and building these alternatives as part of the public stack is a nice way forward.
Well, Richard, you've been involved in the DECODE project, and Ricard, sorry, I'm saying Richard, sorry. Is there another project where we can collaborate in? Because I think this kind of exchange between Barcelona and Amsterdam, between the different organizations, has been really, really fruitful. Do we need Europe to do this kind of things, or are there other ways that you are connected to the movement here in the Netherlands, for example?
Last year, we promote a declaration among 50 cities around the world
to promote a vision of platform economy. This is maybe a better discussion, or a wide discussion about the impact of technology in the different fields of economy. But the sense is which things, which principles should take into consideration cities in order to create a positive impact of digital economy. In this sense, I think it's needed alliance between cities, among the different cities around the world, because, as I mentioned before, the power of the state sometimes it's quite.
Especially in Spain, it's a bit difficult at the moment.
Yeah, no, it is. Maybe I am in a bad position, but it makes sense to think about the power of the states to cut this. Also, when the cities change their political representative, sometimes it's the way that the funding of the cut funding of the projects. They're less powerful, and I think this is needed. It's a commitment of the cities in order to improve some policies, in order to improve these ecosystems. This is a federation of cities, a federation of projects, and this type of things. I think it makes sense.
Nina, to me, what is quite exceptional is that, again, within this thinking about more ethical, more democratic control of data and sovereignty in technology. Again, it's artists, hackers that are at the heart of it. And I think Dyn is a very good example of this. And I showed in the beginning the group around Freedom Internet. Do you feel that there's enough recognized? Because I think if we in the Netherlands think about the future of technology, we'll go looking for talking to big tech or the universities. I think the whole notion that a lot of these new technologies and solutions coming from cultural hackers' environment is not really known to the general public, not even known to the politicians.
Yeah, I think that what is at the core of this is that a system is never going to allow itself to be changed within the system, in my opinion. So for that reason, it also makes sense that it's often most tackled from outsiders, such as hackers or artists or activists and such. And also speaking of a system in a general sense, it would never it would never help the system itself to start recognizing these people as being actual change makers, because in the case that too many people start supporting them, then very important people will lose their status and it will be a big mess. So I agree that, like, objectively speaking, there should probably be more recognition for these kinds of actors, but I'm not surprised that they are being a bit
unknown to the general public.
Yeah.
I think in a Hall of Fame there should be more hackers known than only the ones that are coming from academia and from big companies.
Maybe after
because I know we're a bit late, running a bit late. Well, 8 minutes late. But I want you to ask you a very short last question, all of you, and I think then later on we can have drinks and we can have more discussions in the bar. If you can ask for one thing that you wish for, which would happen in the next year, not in the next 25 years, but now, next year, what would you wish for?
Well, at the moment we are working towards 2 conferences, hopefully, one in the Netherlands and one together with the BBC. And I would really hope that we are able to somehow connect the Dutch network to the European coalition, and that we come up with a couple of very practical, concrete applications we could put out there. And for now, it's, everybody's talking with each other, but it's so hard to take this new step and make this coalition truly European.
Okay, Nina?
I can do anything. The dismantlement of the capitalist system and all the...
Okay, let's wish for that. Ricard?
Nowadays, I am involved in a labor project that takes into account the impact of digital platforms in labor. And some cities, for example, think that they don't have the competence to create the value of labor, because it depends of the competence of state, for example. And one of the main goals, one of the main objectives is to keep the cities into the value of the digital economy. In a holistic vision, it's not only a question of data. It's not only a question. It's to create this wide perspective of what it means, digital economy, and to develop some strategies about this.
Ike, your wish for next year.
Definitely hiring Nina in the city council to make sure that you're part of this capitalist system which is going to demolish everything. Well, while breaking everything down, trying to do two things. One is one of the DECODE pilots, making sure it actually, this National Register of Housing, can we go from concept and dreams to implementation within the government? I'm not sure if we're going to make it, but if it works, I think it would be an achievement. The other one, a serious note, all these strategies we're making, how to get your voice, but other voices on board as well. Otherwise, it's going to be very holistic. That's the goal for next year.
Okay. Sander, what's your wish for?
I think what we're seeing is sort of this realization that something needs to happen in lots of different areas. So you showed Freedom at the beginning, which raised like 2.5 million euros in a very short period of time. We had DECODE, which had successes in city governments. There are things happening on a national level. There's stuff happening with cultural organizations in the Netherlands and internationally. So all around, people are starting to think that something really needs to happen. And sort of as DECODE finishes, I was like as a phoenix from DECODE starts a movement that hopefully connects next year more broadly, that lots of people are aware that something needs to happen and are part of that change of making things happen. That's my wish for next year.
Okay, thank you so much. I think this is a very optimistic end. In 2 weeks' time, the Waag... Sorry? Well, in 2 weeks' time, we celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Waag. And then there will be this book launch, which says the internet is broken, which is not so positive, but then we can fix it. And that last part, we can fix it, we can repair it. I think we show that there is enough there, but it's really about new connections and new coalitions. And so my wish would be that we start to repair it, but then as a real new strong coalition. And I think we showed a lot of different actors in that.
There will be a book signing, right? You will announce
how to repair it. I will tell you exactly how to do it. It's really easy. You have to be optimistic. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So let's the internet is broken, but let's fix it. That will be my wish for next year immediately. Thank you so much for being on the panel, and thanks so much for listened to this. And if you have any questions, please, they're here still for another drink. And now we are going to also look for the next program of Pakhuis de Zwijger. There are a lot of interesting programs where you could join us later on. So please have a look at the program. Thank you so much.